Last Friday, on the last show that we had on our channel here, I was actually out on the jogging path, and Gary had sent me a number of information and some breaking news that made it look like Iran was getting ready to launch a response. And over the weekend, that's in fact exactly what happened with. And so most of the country has been paying a lot of attention to all of these attacks and the ramifications of what happened and what actually was the result of it. And was this just a paltry Iranian attack here? Is Israel going to launch a big response, as many have claimed? While all the focus is on that, there has been very little focus on the consequences and really the ramifications for all this for the United States. And we want to try to bring that focus back where it needs to be, because there's also lots of American pundits are almost screaming with a bloodlust, we need to attack Iran. We need to attack Iran, or we definitely should be helping Israel do the same thing. And they rarely think through what these things actually mean. But Biden has so far said he rules out helping Israel attack Iran if they respond further. And while that's actually okay, and I'm glad to hear that at the moment, it kind of hides that there have been a number of other actions Biden has already taken that has continued to inch us closer and closer into this war. Things you may not be aware of, but that's why we have Daniel Davis Deep Dive, to make you aware of them. And we have, to help us along today, one of our favorite guests, Matt Ho, former Marine, former State Department official, and currently the Associate Director of the Eisenhower Media Network. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Danny. Good to see you.
Well, there always seems to be something going on here, and we're always grateful to have your expertise. And this is just
I have no idea what you want to talk about today, but yeah, right.
You know, if you had been asleep ever since Friday and didn't even know any of this stuff, you would still have better things to say about it than most of the people that I'm seeing on a lot of the mainstream news. So you definitely got that going for you.
Thank you.
But let's
that's
kind
of
right
admittedly a low bar, but thank you.
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. I guess it is. That really wasn't as much of a compliment to you as I really intended it to be. So I guess when you look at it in context, but let's look at how low the bar actually is. So a lot of people want to intentionally take this out of context and just look at, oh my God, Iran did something unprecedented. For the first time in history, Iran attacked Israel from Iranian soil. And that's the narrative that's going on. And as a result, you have people like Steve Scalise saying, you know what, we need to actually take some action. And he wrote this on Twitter. He said, in light of Iran's unjustified attack on Israel, the House will move from its previously announced legislative schedule next week to instead consider legislation that supports our ally Israel and holds Iran and its terrorist proxies accountable. And then the part that really got me, the House of Representatives stands strongly with Israel, and there must be consequences for this unprovoked attack. Unprovoked attacks. So they kind of forgot about this, the embassy, the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy in Syria, which kind of had some important connotations for it. It's international law that has been respected literally for the most part for centuries, not just even decades. And you don't have to look much further back than the U.S. Consulate and an embassy that was attacked in Nairobi in 1999 by Al-Qaeda terrorists. And now this time it's the state of Israel that chose to violate that sanctity, that long-standing tradition. So Scalise seems to have forgotten about that. And ironically, so too did our close ally Britain. Lord Cameron, their foreign minister, was making the same kind of comment. And to their credit, the British media called him out.
A reckless and dangerous thing for Iran to have done. And I think the whole world can see all these countries that have somehow wondered, well, you know, what is the true nature of Iran? It's there in black and white.
What would Britain do if a hostile nation flattened one of our consulates?
Well, we would take the very strong action.
Well, I don't think he expected that.
Right.
But
exactly. That was kind of a bold statement for the British press to say. You know,
It was. I was really
Yeah.
surprised, but I mean, you could tell that. I mean, he's sitting there on set. He can't hide, and he can't undo that one. But that just exposes the absurdity of it. That you think that you can violate international law, and there's little crickets, at least on most of the West.
right. I think Israel itself said that this is a clear violation of international law, which, you know, the chutzpah, right, for Israel to say that. You know, it's you see these statements coming from our elected leaders, as well as from those appointed to positions of great power in the U.S. And, you know, if you didn't know the context, if you were new to all this, you would say, do these people understand English? Do they know what unprovoked and unjustified mean? I mean, because it's so bizarre, their use of language that is so contradictory to reality. But this, of course, gets back to the whole idea of propaganda, of Orwellian doublespeak, you know, that has become so established. It's so entrenched. And in the media, oftentimes does that as well. They just repeat this without providing the context, so that reporter in Britain did a great job correcting, or at least putting David Cameron on the spot. But the media doesn't just amplify or serve as stenographers often for those in power, but often too through their own work, often through omission, they help the narrative, the government's narrative, the empire's narrative go along. So, you know, you see that it'd be very easy when writing about what happened over the weekend to say Iran's retaliatory attacks on Israel. All you got to do is put that one word retaliatory in there, and that solves this whole problem. But I ask you to go back and look at the Post, the Journal, the Times, you know, the reporting from this weekend, and you don't see that type of language. The Wall Street Journal article I read, I think I had to go 10 paragraphs before I saw a reference to Israel's attack on Iran's consulate in Damascus. A friend of mine who doesn't really follow this stuff that much, she came into my house on Sunday, so full day, you know, a day after the attacks and everything. And, you know, she was like, I just heard about this, you know, and she was like so disturbed at the fact that she had heard all these reports on American media about these attacks, and none of them were mentioning that Israel had attacked Iran's embassy first, let alone, of course, the context, right? The decades of this that, you know, you write volumes and volumes of books about. But the phrasing of it, the purposeful phrasing of it, whether through commission or omission, of this as if some type of unprovoked, unjustified attack out of the blue kind of thing, is really insidious, because it does have that impact on people to think that here they are again, these crazy Arabs, not even knowing that Iranians aren't even Arabs, right? Exactly. Look at what they're doing again. You know, I mean, like, so the what we don't know is only made worse by the way both our media and our politicians choose to so irresponsibly.
And you know, Matt, I was talking about doublespeak and just the unconscionable twisting of words into meaning something they don't, or just outright fabricating something. I was on Fox News yesterday and was talking about this, and the whole gaggle of people that Fox had assembled
yesterday. As the Israelis deal with this threat from Iran, they are also fighting a war inside the Gaza Strip.
I'm not sure what that was, but there was a whole gaggle of people that were gathered there and in the green room before we went on, and all of them were of the opinion that, you know, Iran was the bad guy and that Israel was the victim, and what were the U.S. going to do to support it? And I was just kind of standing in the back of the green room, not talking, not saying anything, because I knew they wasn't. And one of the people said, "Hey, so I assume we're all on the same sheet of music here, right?" And I just would remain silent because I thought, well, they'll find out that they're not. So when I got on set and we're in there talking, I made a comment. I said, listen, we got to understand this is not unprovoked. It came as a direct, explicitly stated response to what Israel did on 1 April, whatever. And one of the other persons who was on set with me said, oh, no, that's not the case. It was something else. And we kind of moved on from that. I actually pushed back all across the board. So a lot of people were unhappy. After I got out, the minute that I got out of the set, I saw a tweet from Mark Thiessen of the Washington Post, who said something to the effect of, I can't believe that Daniel Davis just took Iran's side. And of course, I fired back at that. Well, once I just stripped away his argument of saying it was nonsense, then he attached an Israeli statement that says we're going to dispel the myths you're going to be hearing. That number one, that was not a diplomatic mission. It was actually an IRGC command center or whatever. And I'm like, I just sent back to Mark Thiessen. I said, well, then you need to take that up with the Washington Post, your boss, because they said it was a diplomatic encounter,
Right.
and everybody else. But just because they just say, no, this is not a microphone. It is definitely not. It's a washing machine. That's kind of how crazy it is. That's what we're dealing with.
It is. That's what we're dealing with. And it's really difficult for people to accept that, right? That we have people who are in power or their agents, like Mark Thiessen at the Washington Post, who, of course, Mark Thiessen, member of the Bush administration, right? I'm thinking of the right guy who famously advocated for, justified, and then protected torture. And he'll claim that torture is not torture. You know what I mean? Like, so it's that type of what you said, the doublespeak, the lying, maybe gaslighting, but it's lying. And this is what we're up against. We are up against people who lie at the drop of a hat, who their priority is not the truth. Their priority is not the best interest of the American people. Their priority is advancing their own personal and institutional interests. And if that's aligned with Israel, then that's what they're going to do. So for justification, they are going to take as gospel, as the proven word, what the statements from the Israeli Foreign Ministry or the Israeli Defense Ministry are, as opposed to what their own employers say. You know what I mean? So like it is. This is really difficult for people to accept a lot of times, that what we're up against are well-established, well-known, continuous liars. Then the real danger of that is that these are just not the people who are talking about this. These are the people actually in power, right? So when you have someone like a Matt Miller at the State Department or a John Kirby at the National Security Council who lie so eagerly, so readily, so easily, okay, do you really think that when they go back into their conference rooms and they actually make policy, that those lies aren't the things that are also propelling the policy? Right. It's not like these people are saying one thing at the podium because that's what's best to say for right now. Otherwise, it's difficult, it's inconvenient, it's uncomfortable. But in the back rooms where we make policy, yeah, absolutely. No, we know that it was a diplomatic mission, and we're gonna stake our response on the fact that Iran retaliated to attack on their diplomatic mission in Syria. No. I mean, absolutely not. It doesn't work that way. They get in those back rooms, and that type of conversation is going to exclude any justification that Iran had for attacking Israel. And this goes for all aspects of
it does. And now, obviously, it's the people in and out. It's like a revolving door, and they're constantly coming in and out of government. And one who has been in and out, and then in and then out again, and once back in next time is John Bolton. And you talk about somebody who is a war luster. I mean, I sometimes I say war firsters. This guy's a war luster, and he is so excited about what's going on right now. He is really hoping to help out Brother Biden, telling him what should happen next.
In today's world, the Gulf Arab states view the United States as weak and feckless. Iran now faces a potential Israeli strike in response to what happened last night. I think it's imperative that Israel strike decisively, not proportionately, disproportionately, to reestablish deterrence and to convince the terrorist proxies that Iran has set up in its Ring of Fire strategy that they're not intimidated.
Reestablish deterrence. Okay, the deterrence was already in place, and Israel undid that with the attack on the embassy, on the diplomatic compound. And now he wants to reestablish it by basically going to war with Iran. There's no way that Iran is going to allow that kind of strike to happen and not do anything. And subsequently, and we may have one more. No, we did. Yeah. Actually, before I get there, Gary, run that second John Bolton.
The last number I heard was 300 plus drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, and maybe 3 or 4 got through. So who's the fool in this posture right now? Who looks weak? The regime in Iran looks weak. And a way to pin that down is for Israel to go after Iran's nuclear weapons program, which I think it can destroy or disable in very substantial part, if not totally.
Yeah.
He's been saying he's been wanting that nuclear facility for most of his career, and it would be funny if the consequences weren't so great. Instead, it's just pathetic.
Right. And it's angering that he never gets corrected, right? So Iran has had a civilian nuclear program for decades. They had a nuclear weapons program for a while, but for the last 20 years, they have not had a nuclear weapons program, which is distinct from having a civilian nuclear program that could, of course, be utilized in a nuclear weapons program, but they don't have that. And American intelligence has been saying this clearly for 20 years through successive administrations. And people like him never get corrected on that, let alone the fact that no one ever corrects him. None of these media people ever correct him and say, John Bolton, you've been wrong so many times. Why should we, you're wrong. You've been saying this for 20 years and we've never seen it. Why should we believe you? The other thing too is this crowing that's going on among these people like John Bolton and other pro-war advocates that somehow this was a decisive defeat for Iran, a decisive victory for Israel, the fact that Israel shot down all these drones and cruise missiles. Well, first of all, Iran gave about 72 hours of heads up on this attack. That is incredibly uncommon. And anyone who thinks that their purpose was in doing damage when they gave 3 days of notice on this attack, essentially to countries in the region, including to the Americans, that this was going to occur. And then on top of that, when they launched the attack, they announced it. And the drones take 7 or 8 hours. I was driving. My boss called me and he said, hey, they launched their attack. I said, oh, wow. But I started thinking, I wonder what they hit. And he said something to me along the lines like, yeah, it's supposed to be about 2 o'clock in the morning when the drones get there. This is, so if you are foolish enough, to use John Bolton's own words, to believe that this was an actual attack by Iran meant to achieve actual damage, then you are an absolute fool. You just don't know. You are so bound up in your own narrative and propaganda that you can't, or you're just frankly not that smart, which I think John Bolton might profess some of that. He just has the persistence, right? To continue on with it, but yeah, this idea that somehow this was a great success for Israel, and you can look at the other way. They expended, the estimates are maybe $1 billion worth of air defense munitions. Those things are expensive to produce. They don't have that many. The United States could backfill, but hey, where have we sent our air defense munitions to, right? So we don't have Patriots to send them, kind of thing. The other aspect is that you also had those hypersonic missiles get through. And we have no idea of what those hypersonic missiles did in terms of damage to the Israeli air base they struck. Yeah. But we do know they got through.
And I think that was part of the message overall. Right. They sent all these flying lawnmowers, as they call the Shahed drone, because they knew they would be easy to shoot down. But I think that they also subtly to the Israeli Defense Forces said, by the way, if I need to, I can shoot these. And guess what didn't get shot down? I think that there was a message there.
The other part of that message, Danny, as well, is that we've got 300 of these to waste. We're going to let you know that we're sending them and you can shoot them all down. We don't care. We've got plenty. We've got so many of these things. We're selling them around the world. Right. So that's the other message, if I would take as well, is that, okay, they just wasted 300 drones and cruise missiles. We also had to expend then how many of our air defense munitions?
Right.
So, that's huge the thought, right? And the victory, of course, if the people who did this, both in Israel and Iran, the victories that I think they actually have is they can look at their domestic political audience and see the support they're getting from this. Even if it's not across the entire spread of their population, there are pockets that are very enthused within both Israel and Iran at the idea of this war. So that's very dangerous for us to also consider, as the fact that there's a beneficial domestic political win, if you will, for both sides in this, that can only encourage future actions, because the political leadership says, it worked pretty well when we attacked them. That worked pretty well. We really didn't suffer much damage. Yeah, it cost us a lot of air defense missions, or it cost us a lot of cruise missiles and drones, but we can replace those eventually, and the costs weren't that great, but the political points we scored were terrific. So let's do it again, and of course we know where that could go.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's the issue. And that's kind of one of the cruxes of what we wanted to talk about today is what is the potential for the US getting sucked into a war. Now, President Biden has been, to his credit, pretty firm since this retaliation happened in saying that if Israel goes back and does another round into Iran, which many of their senior leaders are saying they're going to include again today, that we're not done and we're going to continue on. Biden says, then you're on your own on that one. We're not going to participate in that. And that's good as far as it goes. But what is not being paid attention to a lot is that we're already moving down that road. And here's a comment by John Kirby, which was meant to say what a great thing we're doing to help Israel. But there's some other messages here. Check this out.
American leadership was absolutely vital to helping Israel defend itself. We had American fighter pilots in the air, first time ever that we were involved in the active defense of Israel in a combat sort of scenario. That's how seriously we take our commitments. And as the Israelis have said themselves, they couldn't have done what they did without American help.
Exactly. They couldn't have done that without our help. Meaning, I mean, play through what he just said. American fighter aircrafts were actively engaged in attacking Iranian drones, an Iranian attack. So it knocked out their air power. So we have been engaged with that. And as I'm going to actually, Gary, go ahead and pull that map up if you could, the one that I had there that we're going to put at the end. This is where we're already engaged, Matt. I mean, you see all of these bases in the upper left-hand corner. That number is a lot higher than 121 now, but those are the locations where our troops have been engaged by a lot of these Iran-backed groups. And as you and I have talked about before, those should all be withdrawn because they're nothing but points of strategic vulnerability. But every time one of those gets hit, then we respond. So we fired into Syria. We've assassinated leaders in Baghdad. So we've continued to get more involved. You see the issues down on the lower side there about the Red Sea attacks. And those now then we're engaged in a constant fight there. We're engaged in Yemen with the Houthis. That are also, all of this is in direct response to the Israeli war and everything that has happened since Israel went into the Gaza Strip. All of these things are manifestations of that, and we are getting more and more involved. We've already had 3 troops killed as a result of all of these counter responses, and then you see, according to Kirby there, we actually directly engaged Iranian military assets. So we keep getting more and more involved, and it won't take much for us to get actually into a war. What do you think of that?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. The idea that we're being pulled in or sucked in, we're there. I mean, we're dangling over the edge. It's kind of like I've got this thing stuck in my head. If people are Star Wars fans, what was it, the Sarlacc pit that swallowed up Boba Fett? Be kind of like standing over the Sarlacc pit and sticking your head in and being like, oh, the Sarlacc pit monster swallowed me up. You know what I mean? Like, we've put ourselves in this position. We've created this reality. You could say, take what Kirby was saying about the United States coming to the defense of Israel and how Israel can't defend themselves without us, which is totally true. Gives us an amazing amount of leverage over Israel, which we're using absolutely none of. We've also have the position where Israel is using us, right? So Israel launches that attack on Damascus, on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, suffers no consequences from it. The U.S. pulls no leverage on them whatsoever, right? And now the United States is involved in Iran's retaliation because we have to be. This is the relationship we have. This is the political reality. Could you imagine what would happen in Congress if the United States did not defend Israel in this manner, right? I mean, so like the complicated series of events that have, well, I guess I shouldn't say it's complicated because it's pretty basic decision making. But the thing about it is that the United States is in this position where it has its ability to make reality. But because of choices it's made, particularly in domestic political politics, it is in a corner. It has to go along with what Israel does. And so Israel can go and carry out another act like the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus and fully expect with 100% confidence that the United States is going to, quote, defend it, unquote. Now, supposedly, we've told them we won't support a retaliatory attack against Iran for this attack, but we'll see. I mean, you got to remember that they always phrase things where defensive. This is
yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
Also, I did want to say one more thing, Danny.
Yeah,
is
sure.
Folks want what you were getting about spread of this. There was a great article by Ken Klippenstein, I think today in The Intercept, where he talks about how there are 16 nations involved in this, and he goes through it all. You know, those ships in the Red Sea that are taking attacks constantly and also launching attacks against the Yemenis. Those ships go to Oman all the time, right? I mean, so when you start actually looking at the number of nations involved in this, yeah, Ken Klippenstein adds it up to 16. So the idea that this is somehow just Israel, Iran, or Israel, the U.S. and Iran, and even in this defense of Israel, there are British and French and Jordanian aircraft and missiles involved, and that's really something for I think for the Jordanians to take such an active role. They're saying, well, we were protecting the population, but they actually endangered their own population because they were shooting those things down over Jordanian airspace. Possibility it could land on some Jordanian house someplace. So, I mean, the how big this web, it's pretty immense.
And the issue for the United States is no one is thinking about. That's one of the things characteristic of whether it's Steve Scalise or John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, Lindsey Graham, all these guys who have been longtime cheerleaders for going into war with Iran, or Jack Keane, who's absurdly says not long ago in context of going into Iran that, oh, we're not talking about going to a war with them. We just want to fire a bunch of missiles and then nothing happened in return. So it's cool. We're not actually going to go to war with them, oblivious to the fact that there's two sides of that and they get a vote. Now, you alluded to this just a second ago, but there's, I think, another hidden message here from the Iranian foreign minister earlier today in his comments about what happened.
We notified our brothers in the region, where the United States has military bases in their countries, that our goal is only to punish the Israeli regime and that we are not seeking to target American bases in the region.
Yet,
exactly.
They also subsequently said, but if we are attacked further and the U.S. participates in it, then we will directly attack the troops in Iraq and in Syria that are in there. Now, I want to play a clip of something that was on our show not long ago where we looked at this possibility somewhat a few weeks or actually a couple of months, I think, ago. And former CIA officer Mike Domino pointed out just how vulnerable our troops are.
We're talking about some very significant missile capabilities here that Iran can use to reach out and touch really any U.S. bases in the region, not even just in Iraq and Syria, although I think that's what Iran would most likely target. And look, if you're talking about a lot of these smaller bases that have, CRAMs, which use 20 millimeter cannons and have an effective range of about 6,000 to 8,000 feet and mostly shoot down, small drones and unguided rockets and stuff. Those systems are not capable of providing the air defense capabilities against these missiles. They're just not.
Gary, can you bring that map back up again that I had there before? Matt, if you see on the upper left-hand corner there, those are locations where our troops are. There's no Iron Dome over them. Most of them don't even have Patriot systems. And those, a lot of those, even without the higher-end ballistic missiles from Iran, if they fired them at those, almost nothing could stop them. That's how vulnerable we are. Why does no one care about our troops there? I'm talking
and there's another aspect of this, and I think we talked about this. I wrote about this back in January, like my nightmare, I think it was January, my nightmare scenario that would occur would be that you do get this position where Iran determines they have to use it or lose it. So they utilize their missile systems against our forces in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, etc., essentially shutting down most of the air support for those bases, right? You have those bases in Iraq and Syria that are also targeted, but then you have large volumes of Iranian-aligned, Iranian allies in Syria and Iraq. Could those troops, could those militias, the PMF, Popular Mobilization Forces, these are the forces that defeated the Islamic State, very well trained, a lot of experience, good commanders. Could they then be utilized to attack the American bases? And so then you have a question of you don't have American air support because the air bases are shut down because of Iranian missile strikes. Then you don't have you have attacks on the bases themselves, so they're already damaged. But then you have this idea that would you have PMF forces attacking U.S. bases, U.S. facilities directly? And then you have this nightmare scenario then of those forces being overrun and possibly taken prisoner. And, I mean, so how this could go bad, in a nightmare scenario, it's easy to see. And I mean, so you take what the foreign minister of Iran was saying and the way he said it was like, as you said, we haven't decided to do that yet. It's also, I think, messaging to the Gulf monarchies that host these bases that, you have a decision to make. You have a decision, and you could, we know that many of these aircraft, or most of the aircraft that shot down our drones, came from your bases. And you have a decision to make what you want to do. Do you want to be involved in a war with us? I mean, because the role of the American aircraft and British aircraft in this was, and I guess French as well. I just understood the French were involved too. That my understanding, they shot down at least 100 of these things.
According to Herbert, we had 70 by ourselves, and then there was the Jordanians, the French also had some more, and the Israeli Air Force. So yeah, altogether that was the case.
Yeah. So I mean, what can occur from this? You also have to remember very clearly that the Iranians said, we consider this matter concluded. Right. Yeah. So after they launched their attacks, they said, this is done.
Yeah. We don't want war.
We don't want war. It's over. We and they didn't kill anybody. They've seriously hurt a Bedouin girl, but no one was killed that we know of. And no one was seen to be really hurt that we know of. And it really was this demonstration of capabilities that the Iranians were showing, as well as a way to give something to their political audience, to their people, and then as well to put, this is a warning. And so
frankly, and it's kind of embarrassing. It showed a lot of restraint because there were a total of 16 Iranians that were killed in that embassy blast, on top of the 7 above the 7 generals or whatever it was. But there were 16 people killed. No one was killed in the Iranian response. So in many cases, it was less than tit for tat.
Right. And again, as we spoke about, this was announced ahead of time. It was announced at the time of the launch. The Iranians are well aware of the capabilities of these air defense systems. I mean, they know what Israel has done before. They've also seen how these weapon systems or equivalent weapon systems have worked in Ukraine. And so that they do know that their stuff's not going to get through, particularly when it's got a 7 or 8 hour flight time. What I mean? So
sounds like a lawnmower and is traveling, almost like as fast as a car. So
exactly. Yeah. I don't even think they go barely about 100 miles an hour. I think. So the hardest thing is for the aircraft to shoot them down because they're not advanced aircraft.
Now, I want to ask your opinion on something related to this topic here, because I think it's really important that again, one of the biggest sins that our side always commits is that we don't think about what's next. We don't understand the consequences of stuff. We want to start an action. We don't think about how long it takes to sustain it. And I think that one of the biggest vulnerabilities for Israel is if they took this action that Bolton and several of these other people are talking about, that's not going to get rid of the Iranian regime. That's not regime change. It's not a defeat of military. It's just going to stir the hornet's nest up, because unless you invade with several 100,000 men and conquer the country, everything is still going to be viable and in action. If Israel gets into a sustained back and forth with Iran, and because it's going to be an air war, there's not going to be a lot of, I don't think, any ground troops other than maybe special forces involved in either side. Iran has thousands, tens of thousands of these drones, and they can just keep rolling them in there. And the interceptor missiles, this is the key part I wanted to ask you about. Given how many Patriot systems that we're sending to Ukraine already, the few we have in, J.D. Vance mentioned the other day that it's a very slow process to build those interceptor missiles. How many interceptor missiles does Israel have, and how long could they keep shooting them down before finally these cheap $30,000 drones can fly in uncontested and they can hit pinpoint targets?
Right, exactly. That's what we've seen that in Ukraine to a degree. You can produce these drones so cheaply and so quickly, and then you can just throw them at the air defense systems to, one, overwhelm them, but also exhaust them. So I don't know what the ratio would be. But say for every interceptor that you can make, the Iranians can make 10 drones. I've got no idea if that's the case, but just assume that, right? I mean, so yeah, right. I mean, so just take that, and you could see how over time it gets to the point where it's compounded over time to the point that Israel is down to almost nothing, while Iran has substantial amounts, and they're able to keep producing them. So then, of course, the question becomes Israel trying to destroy the Iranian production facilities, right? And so now you're talking about strikes into more populated areas, wherever they build these things, right? I mean, so it becomes more escalatory in that way, as well as the pressure on the Israelis to demonstrate that they're doing something. Right? Because if these drone strikes keep occurring, the Israeli public is going to be very upset, very dismayed, very angry that their government's not doing anything to protect them. So Israel then, of course, has to show that they're doing something. They have to make something impactful happen, whether it's real in sense of actually having an effect on Iran's military capabilities, or if it's just surely for propaganda. So now you start seeing maybe more extreme events. More extreme actions, more actions meant to hit population centers more than military targets. And then I would say there is a possibility for ground combat here, in the sense that, does this mean Israel chooses to, and we a lot of us, we've talked about this, think that there's a pretty good possibility that Israel is going to launch an attack into Lebanon. Does this tip that to make it almost a certainty that Israel launches into Lebanon, particularly if Hezbollah enters in and utilizes what's the estimates, 100,000 rockets and missiles they have, right? So, I mean, that's the other side of it, right? I mean, is that you're not just dealing with Iran, but you're dealing with Iran's allies, both in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria. And then we all have to remember, this brings in Syria, or elements of Syria. The Russians are in Syria. And who's also in Syria? The Americans. And
Let me ask you this question here on that, because it's not even only Israel and Iran that could cause this escalation, but there's another one. Let's see, what was it? I guess a day or two before Iran launched its response here, Netanyahu went before his public and interviewed some of his pilots in front of a very ominous-looking fighter aircraft, and said this.
אמרתי שאנחנו בימים מאתגרים. אנחנו בעיצומה של המלחמה בעזה שנמשכת במלוא עוזה. במקביל אנחנו ממשיכים במאמצים שלא נפסקים כדי להחזיר את חטופינו. אבל אנחנו נערכים גם לתרחישים של אתגרים מזירות אחרות. ואנחנו קבענו עיקרון פשוט. מי שפוגע בנו, אנחנו פוגעים בו. אנחנו נערכים לענות על הצרכים הביטחוניים של מדינת ישראל, גם בהגנה וגם בהתקפה.
Matt, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to have to cut this short, because I actually have another television hit that I just realized I'm late for.
Oh, no. Okay, go.
Very sorry to everybody for cutting it off quite that short, but thank you for your time today, and we'll see you later this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.